Hello, and thanks again for joining us for another Fathom Live, a live stream show dedicated to giving you tips and insights from experts in and around the real estate industry. I'm your host, Jeff Sturtz. Glad to be with you today. Let's get to some contest stuff. By the way, if you're watching, go ahead and start sharing the video. You will be automatically entered into a contest, a drawing for a chance to win one of 4 prizes. So share and comment. Just give us a shout out where you're hailing from, and you'll automatically be entered. But last week we had a contest, same kind of contest, winning one of 4 prizes, either an OnTarget transaction if they're in your area, a listing photo package, 2 months free of GoSocial agent lead service, as well as a yard sign package. So one of those 4 prizes. So I'm going to pick our winner here, our traditional way here from our handy bag. So whoever emerges here is victorious. And we have Genevieve Golden. So we've had you on the show here before, Genevieve. So thank you for continuing to participate in the live stream show, and it paid off. There you go. You won. So congratulations. Also, again, share today. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. But if you share on YouTube or Facebook, you'll get automatically entered. Also, our show guest today is Richard Schafritz. But before we bring him on, if you have somebody that you would say, hey, I think that person would make a great show guest, let us know. You can just post their name in the comments. You could email marketing@fathomrealty.com. However you want to. If you want to send a carrier pigeon, that's fine. Just let us know, hey, this person I think would be great to be on the live show. Maybe it's yourself, and you would want to apply for that as well. But we'd love to have names because we want to continue to provide you as much value as we can for this show. Also, I would like to thank our sponsor, GoSocial Agent. They will help you with your social media presence by providing affordable and effective social media marketing solutions to help you grow your business, including helping you set up a business account, making it look nice, putting postings so you don't have one of those Facebook pages that's just kind of empty or rarely ever has activity on it. They provide agent-branded articles, buyer and seller handbooks. You can also do ads through them, which is one of the prizes here. But they help you grow your online community and generate leads. So check them out at GoSocialAgent.com. You can get started today. And I think for the Fathom agents, you even get like a free year trial for some of that stuff. So that's a pretty cool deal as well. Again, our guest today is Richard Schafritz out in Atlanta, Georgia. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be a guest.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here. Now, Richard is a closing attorney, member at Schafritz and Dean LLC. You have 28 years of experience in the real estate industry, 10 years in mortgage banking, and you've done over 750 closings as a loan originator, and another 4.5 years with commercial lending. And then in the past 18 years or so, from my understanding, you've also worked now as a closing attorney. So a lot of experience. So I'm looking forward to hearing from your insight and the experience that you've had dealing with realtors and everyone that comes to the closing table or helps bring everything to the closing table. Also, as world famous as we are going to make you on this show, we hope.
I'm expecting that.
Yeah.
I'm expecting that.
I understand that this is not your first debut. You're not your first television or screen debut. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I've been preparing for this moment, this broadcast, all my life. It started when I was on the Bozo show in the audience at age 6. And then from there, I was a celebrity guest judge on a local American Idol meets hip hop, Dig It or Diss It on the WSB. I'm not sure anybody ever saw it, but it was on at 1 a.m. about 10 years ago. And then I've been preparing. I took a comedy class and had the opportunity to do 4 minutes original material when I graduated at the Punchline, where Jerry Seinfeld and other greats have performed. And clearly, I needed to keep my day job. So here's where we're at.
Oh, very good. I mean, so this should be like old hat to you. So no, we are very we're very glad you're with us today, and that is a fascinating history of show business. I want to talk about a couple of different things with you today because you have experience in different avenues of the real estate industry, but I want to look for a little bit here at making a smooth closing happen. And as I've kind of gone through researching this and talking with you, I kind of see it sort of from a timeline perspective, sort of like how do you set things up to make sure this happens? How do you get things, all your T's crossed and I's dotted and that kind of thing. And then you have the actual closing day and making sure that happens well. So I kind of want to explore it that way. And you've worked with a lot of different people, helping people. There's a lot of different people, I should say, that help bring the closing to happen, from realtors to title attorneys and loan originators. Who are the people that you would say have the most influence as to whether everything goes well, and what should a real estate agent look for when finding people who can help provide a smooth closing?
Well, that's a really good question, Jeff, because some of the states, and I'm going to try to broaden this beyond Georgia, where we have to have closing attorneys who conduct the transactions too. States all around the country, some are using escrow agents, some are using title companies. So to the extent I say closing attorney, think about your favorite title company, think about your favorite escrow company. But, there are, when I was a young loan officer, Jeff, I was told by by one of my many mentors that over 50 hands touched a file for a closing by the time it went from the real estate agent and their clients to the closing table. And if you just think about it, it makes a lot of sense. The agent has an assistant that helps the agent. Sometimes the assistant sends it over. Somebody opens the file at the attorney's office or at the lender's office, and then they pass it off to somebody. They pass it off. They order appraisals. They order all these things. So ultimately, what I try to tell everybody, and where I try to go with this, is don't assume anything and over communicate. Because now I do have some agents who tell me, I just want to show up at the closing and everything goes perfect. But the reality is that life isn't perfect, real estate's not perfect, and to make for your best transactions, you've got to work as a team. Who's the most important? Well, it's the guy staring in the mirror or the lady staring in the mirror, because there's not a single professional involved that if they fail to perform their job adequately, it is going to avoid a challenge at the closing or a challenge prior to the closing. So, if you're the agent, don't assume that the lender or the attorney received a contract from you. Had a really interesting situation one time recently, Jeff, where an agent thought she sent a contract on a cash purchase to us. The only way I found out about it was 4 days before the closing. The listing agent called, a little upset that nobody had been in touch with her and her client. Well, we didn't even have the contract. There was an ice storm in Atlanta at the time, and I remember letting her know, "Don't worry, this is normal. Our system's down. Let me find out." Called my agent, who does send us the transaction, and she says, "Oh my gosh, it never left my my outbox." So wow. I always tell folks, the first thing you want to do if you're an agent is make sure that the parties that you are working with directly have everything they need. Don't assume it. Confirm it. I'd rather an agent contact me too many times than forget to order the contract. So, the closing.
As it relates to communication, where do you find that the breakdown happens most often?
That's it's interesting. I really think that from my perspective, the breakdowns literally it can happen every link of the process. And so what I like to do is I train my staff to make sure that they send out a confirmation when we receive an order. I suggest to the agents and the mortgage professionals that I work with that they confirm everything, never assume anything, because each step of the way there's the opportunity for a failed communication. If the loan officer, the lender more particularly, forgets to order an appraisal, and believe it or not, it happens. The other thing too is people are human. When I was a loan officer, it used to be that the title orders were sent to the attorney and they ended up in the wrong file as a fax. Today, it's somebody deletes an email. The key is at each link, go back and really verify and confirm that the communication happened. I think where the most problems occur is people make the assumption that because they send an email, they're communicating. And, for a variety of reasons, email is not communication. I always tell my staff unless the other side acknowledges receipt of it,
right.
and communicates back with you.
So I'm guessing this is going to lean one way or the other. Are there things that working with real estate agents that they try to jump on too early, or are there things that usually come to you too late, or that they start too late? And if so, what are those things?
Well, the reality is too quick is usually not the problem. I would rather have an agent send me a contract. Occasionally, I thought about this when you first brought it up in our conversation. Occasionally, an agent gets exuberantly excited, sends us a contract that hasn't been fully executed, and the deal dies. They forget to call. We've done all the work. We're ready, or not done all the work, but we've opened the file and we've started, only to discover that it's not going to be a closing. I would rather that on the rare occasion happen than the too late. The too late are, I made some notes to myself, amendments and addendums. Example, it's too late for the agent to ask me at the closing table about the FHA repair addendum. I had this actually happen one time. The agent had drafted the FHA amendment. It sounded like the house was caving in by the time she got done. And what she explained was, well, I was using this as leverage. She hadn't mentioned it at all during the process, hadn't sent the amendment to the lender or the closing attorney, which was us. And what ended up happening is we ended up getting it closed. We navigated through the process. We kept everybody under. Sorry for that.
No worries. That must be the other the other studios trying to call you in for more shows.
But we got it done, but it didn't close the same day, and nobody was upset with the lender. Nobody was upset with Schafritz and Dean. But we want everyone to walk away happy. That's our tagline. That's what we're going for. That's what I think a transaction should look like. And if you get us those amendments too late, they can really have a negative consequence on a transaction, and they can even stop a transaction. So as soon as you draft an amendment as an agent, make sure your lender and your attorney receive it. In this particular case, neither of them received it, and the failure to communicate just led to a delay. Another example of something that can really be too late, Georgia used to require, and I know I'm talking to folks that could be all around the country, we no longer require surveys in this state. You don't have to have a survey to close. I believe some states you still do. I recommend always getting a survey, because even though we have what we call a an enhanced owner's policy. It's not a substitute for a survey. But if you're going to do the survey, it's too late if you bring me the survey after the closing has occurred. You want to make sure you order that early. You want to make sure you order it before you purchase the home, not when you go to put up the fence and discover that there's an encroachment. Your neighbor's house is on your yard. We've had that before. Those are problems that we can't solve. Finally, HOA letters. I know, I'm talking to a national audience, but they are somewhat the bane of real estate professionals' existence, agents, mortgage professionals, and closing attorneys, because we as a firm are usually asking for 4 or 5 data points, but the closer we get in time to a closing, Jeff, the more the price of that letter goes up. It's a rush fee, and so it's not uncommon for us to really be, sort of, begging a party to please pay for the item and make sure that it's done early on to avoid, extra costs that are unnecessary. So.
Very good.
Those are examples of things that you want to stay away from doing too late.
We recently interviewed a team leader. She's also a district director, and one of her continued pieces of advice was continue learning, continue to understand the contracts that you are sending to people, and be able to walk through them with your client, so they understand everything that they're doing and signing, and there's confidence all around as it relates to the contracts. What would you say is a helpful way to approach contracts?
Well, first, let me say that I absolutely agree with that team leader. I read a book by an author recently who said that the salesperson that he was describing would read and reread their core contract on a monthly basis, which makes sense because as a lifelong learner and somebody who's very much into just trying to improve, I'm part of the Buffini coaching over the last 10 years or so. Ultimately, I remember Brian Buffini saying that his pilots go back for training annually because human beings, forget 85% of what they learn within 12 months. So if you're not staying on top of your contracts, then you're going to forget, even if you're a pro, even if you're seasoned. And of course, I don't know about every state, but in Georgia, these contracts are being updated either semi-annually or annually at a minimum. And what I recommend to the agents in Georgia, and I'm sure this is true everywhere, is your association takes the time and invests in drafting contracts. Those contracts that become the fill in the blanks are drafted to protect you, the agent, and give the buyer and seller the benefit of the bargain that they're attempting to negotiate. Stick with that GAR contract in Georgia, or the association contract throughout the country. And then the other piece of advice I like to give folks is make sure that if it's not a GAR contract, that you're working with new construction, a builder hands you a 42-page contract, don't let your client sign it right then and there. I don't care how much pressure they're putting on you or your client. Go home, read the contract, call your attorney, call your broker, make sure you understand what they're getting into, because new construction especially is an area of where I find people lose earnest money quite a bit because they don't realize that builder said you're not getting that earnest money back for almost every reason.
One of the things that you had noted was to treat a contract like a checklist. What do you mean by that?
Well, in every contract, at least every contract that I look at and review, there are timelines. So, for example, in the Georgia Association of Realtor contract on page 1, a due diligence period might be 10 days from the date of binding date. First of all, I encourage agents to understand from means. It does not mean inclusive of the day that it goes binding, but it's real important to do the math, and it's real important to be the taskmaster if you're the agent. Nobody has a better relationship with that buyer or seller than the realtor. They are really deep into creating and cultivating that relationship. And one of the things, going back to communication, is really encourage your buyer and seller to cooperate with the closing attorney, but to follow your advice and to understand that these purchase and sale agreements, as I call them, are big boy, big girl contracts. And if you are told in your contract that the buyer has to make loan application in 5 days, don't make loan application in 7 days. I don't care if it's your favorite closing loan officer. Don't put that person in a position where they're asking you, you're asking them to help out your client. Your clients need to perform. So if it's 10 days of due diligence, get the due diligence done within the time frame. And there are item after item after item in that contract. And I know in Georgia, a lot of the agents have gone to using contract to closing, and that's great because somebody is there to help you manage the transaction. Ultimately, if your client misses a deadline, they're going to be upset with you. And it's not uncommon, Jeff, for me to see agents just let their clients' due diligence period lapse, or miss making loan application for a day, and so you end up really stuck in those cases and risking any remedies that may be available throughout the United States in any of the states. So what I mean is, follow your timelines in your sales contracts, and make sure your clients know the importance and the urgency of cooperating with those timelines as well.
As it leads up to closing time, and you are kind of doing the crossing the T's and dotting the I's, what are the most document-related things overlooked or details missed when agents are working with their clients?
Well, one of the things that's interesting to me is there are certain truisms that I've talked about for years. It's a truism in Georgia, and I'm sure nationwide, that at least our agents are really looking for three things. And it sounds funny, but they want good chocolates on the closing table. They want to be in that closing room no more than an hour. And by the way, in Georgia, we've got everybody sitting in the closing room most of the time, buyers and sellers, and they want to walk away with their commission. And I understand that they've worked hard. This is the finish line. But when the CFPB, Dodd-Frank, and laws started coming into effect that changed the way mortgages were closed, and lenders and closing attorneys, title companies had to perform, there's absolutely no excuse now for us to walk into a transaction the day of closing and, we've spelled the borrower's name incorrectly. Now, you can point a finger and say, well, why didn't the staff person at the law firm, or why didn't the lender catch it? But what I mean is, we're getting that settlement statement out 3 days in advance of closing. We're getting the closing disclosure, the HUD-1. Encourage your clients to really review not only their bottom line if they're the seller, because that's all they really care about, but take a look at the address. Make sure the zip code's correct. Make sure it's not drive, it's street. Make sure that it's the right even date on the documents. Lenders make mistakes. Settlement companies like mine make mistakes. Certainly, I make mistakes. I might have made one since we started this call. But the reality is that don't just focus on your. There's two things that I know an agent will always focus on. They will always focus on, rightly so, is their commission correct? And is the bottom line figure for their client correct? But it's pretty embarrassing to all when we go to cut the checks, and the agent says, well, this isn't this check isn't made out to the right broker because I switched brokers, and I say, well, did you look at the settlement statement we sent you? And because we didn't change it from the time we sent it out to you.
Right.
So if agents will just take the time, and this is one of the things that I work with new agents all the time on, but the truth is the examples that I've given thus far of failed communications and challenges have happened with agents that are very, very seasoned. So it's not just a new agent thing or an inexperienced agent. I tell my staff all the time, Jeff, this is a detail business. This is a devil in the detail business. And, it takes a village maybe to raise a child. It also takes a village to have a great closing, one where everybody walks away happy. And everybody's got to do their part and pay attention to the details and hopefully encourage buyers and sellers to do the same.
And that
And
kind
I
of
think
goes.
nobody can do. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think anybody has more of a connection and more of an ability to control not control their client, but control their client's willingness to cooperate during a process leading up to the day of closing.
I was just going to say that goes back to your first piece of advice, and that is never assume that everything is just going to be okay or the way it was. Always continue to review and check and make sure that all the details are correct. I want to talk a little bit later here just about the kind of person you want to be when you're dealing with clients. With other people like loan officers and title attorneys or closing or title companies. But how do you, as we're leading up to the closing table, how do you create or what things can I do to make sure that the atmosphere is just relaxing and peaceful for my clients so they're not feeling the stress maybe that even I'm feeling as an agent coming to the closing table?
What I try to share with agents is ultimately when you're involved in a transaction, the calmer you can be. You had asked me early on who are some of the people you admire most, and I will tell you. I put some people that are near and dear to my heart. One of them was my law partner, Doug Dean, because no matter how challenging a circumstance is, he never loses his cool. And I think one of the things I learned from him is how important it is to be the calmest guy in the room whenever possible. So often, I feel like the agents get too emotionally involved. And they come in more charged up than their clients. And one of the learning points or the something that stuck with me from all my years of Buffini is simply that you want to make people feel like you do this all the time. And so Brian Buffini has these buzzwords. And by the way, this isn't an advertisement for Buffini. It's just what I know. And he says, talk to people and say, when something goes wrong, this is normal. This is customary. These things happen. We can solve the problem because if you can keep everybody level-headed, you can probably solve the majority of problems. There are some that have been presented that are just you can't overcome. But for the most part, if everyone remains level-headed, and I've seen it before where agents are there, I always remind agents the word co-op is short for cooperative, and if the two of you can work professionally with one another, even in a stressful situation, still zealously advocating for your client and representing them, but doing it in a way that shows that professional courtesy to everyone, I think you're going to get it worked out 9 times out of 10.
Very good. Very good. We just had a comment from Genevieve, who happened to have won our contest our prize this week.
I love Genevieve. Hopefully she's not saying turn the mic off on this guy.
No.
Hopefully
She's just
no.
echoing. She said
What's
he's
the
right
comment?
on. He's right on being the calmest person in the room, and you want to be that. Let's expand that a little bit, though, if you don't mind. Who are the right people to work with? And this is something that I know you and I had talked about before the show, just about
Right.
that. A lot of this starts with working with the right people. So, from your years of experience, from different vantage points, who are the best people to work with? What kind of person is really the most helpful to bring things to get for a peaceful closing?
Sure. Well, of course, as we've been chatting, I pointed out that the person who remains calm and level-headed is somebody we want to work with. But occasionally, or even more than occasionally, I find that the real estate agent is almost trying to be a consumer advocate. For example, with a buyer, they're trying to find the loan officer that will and these are the folks that are more transactional than relational most of the time. And I try to go after people who are relational because, again, we know that this is a challenging industry. We know it's an emotionally charged world. People are buying their most expensive asset they're ever going to purchase. And as Norman Van Peel was telling a young man, you don't want problems? I got a place for you. It's down the street. It's called Woodland Cemetery in his book. So problems are gonna pop up. And so you need great teammates. And I tell you, don't look for the guy that's got the lowest rate, the lowest fees. Look for the folks that are going to make that transaction shine at the closing table, make you look good at the closing table, where the consumer walks away happy. The buyer or the seller, your client, the people you care most about, they're not going to remember whether they spent $50 or $58 for something. What they're going to remember is, did I have a great experience? Did people keep me in the loop? So, it's important. I think agents want to work with loan officers that communicate effectively. The same is true for closing agents who deliver on what they say they're going to deliver on. And when there's a problem, as my law partner jokes, the problem is never the issue, it's the cover up. Or as we hear sometimes, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. It's keeping people in the loop, making sure, one of the things you and you kind of talked about during our preliminary conversations is, what are some books that have really stuck with you? What are some great authors? And I read a book by Bernie Marcus, Arthur Blank, who founded Home Depot, and it's probably the most monumental business book I ever read, because I can quote it from nearly 20 years ago when I read the book. There were two points, and one was, never treat your banker like a mushroom. And I said, so if you don't know what that means,
I think I know what that means.
Huh? Do you know what it means?
Where you always feel like you're under a pile of manure, and then when you finally see the light of day, somebody dumps some more manure on you.
Yeah, keep them in the dark and feed them a lot of manure. And so what I tell folks is, shoot straight with people. If there's a problem, don't procrastinate. Hit the problem. We had a closing going on where, we were supposed to have the closing package, and everybody's emotions are heightened. And I can only dance so long before I got to come clean. I don't have the the loan package. I'm not here to throw anybody under the bus. In fact, that's one of my core philosophies is, we don't throw anybody under the bus. But and I have large shoulders. I don't know if they look like that, but and track marks all over my back. But we don't throw people under the bus. But when the lender doesn't deliver a loan package, and you're 4 hours after you're supposed to start, and then it becomes the next day, and then it becomes 2 days later, and everybody's upset with everybody. Somehow they're even upset with our law firm, And it turns out that they had to switch lenders because the loan officer at the other place couldn't get it done. 2 weeks later, it closes. I think if we had just communicated better and been more upfront, we could have de-escalated problems, and we might have even been able to work collaboratively to move up that closing time. So I think if you have bad news, just get it out there,
Right. Instead of trying to cover it up,
and then deal with it.
I don't know if you'd be able to field this question here, but Genevieve also she asked how much time does
Boy, do I like Genevieve.
How much time does it typically take to do a title search in Georgia? How far back in time do you go to cure title issues?
So in Georgia, and this may or may not have a lot of interest for everybody, in Georgia, we're trying to get our title work turned in 3 business days. And we can outsource our title work. Most law firms do. Some of the smaller ones the individuals will actually run their own titles. But generally speaking, if you're doing it properly, it's going to take a couple of days, a few days, unless it's a rush. And we're usually going back and doing an unlimited search, which is 50 years. So a minimum of 50 years back to a vesting deed. So if you've got to go back beyond 50 years, you got to go back beyond 50 years. But that is Genevieve in Georgia, or
no. She's in Central East Texas area. So.
Oh wow. Okay.
But
thank you, Genevieve. I like your questions. I love fielding questions.
So often
stump the attorney.
Yeah, right. Anybody else got a real hard one for? When you walk,
I'll get my law partner. He's the smart one. If it comes down to it, but we will get your questions answered on air.
When you walk a mile in somebody's shoes, sometimes the things that were frustrating to you from being on the other side all of a sudden become clear. Why it's difficult, or you just have a better understanding of life from their perspective. Your wife in the last 4 years jumped into the ranks of being a real estate agent. How has that changed your perspective, or has it changed at all on working with realtors?
Well, let me say this. As a young loan officer, I work very closely with realtors. As a young attorney, and today I work very closely with realtors. It does change your perspective when in my case, my wife of 28 years, shout out to my lovely wife, Stacy, who I am madly in love with. I will say that I now appreciate just how tough the emotional journey is for you guys out there living who are real estate agents. I've always realized that you're independent contractors, but you all have a lot riding on every closing. And I've always recognized that agents, to be a successful agent, you might do 2, 3, 5, 7 closings a month. I mean, there are folks that do a lot more, but I mean, you can be very successful closing 5 transactions a month. A loan officer, you can be very successful, as most people would think of success, doing 10 closings a month. My mid-sized law firm has to do 200 closings a month just to break even. So we get further and further away from the consumer. The agent, what I've learned from my wife is just how much time is going into communicating with your clients, helping them through their emotional. I mean, the good agents have to be a rock for their clients, and they have to, get everything addressed for them to their satisfaction. And quite frankly, sometimes that might mean being a good psychologist, because people are so emotionally charged while they're going through this process, and being able to walk people, like I say, away from the ledge, letting them know that certain things are normal and customary, and we're going to get through it. We're going to work through it.
Kind of on that vein, then, what would you say? And this is a question we ask just about every one of our guests. What would you say is one of the hardest lessons you've learned having been in this business for over 28 years?
Um, well, I think, I've talked a lot about communication, and I've been on both sides. I've been on the side where there's some humble pie, and we're apologizing that we failed to communicate effectively. And I've been on the side of trying to accept graciously somebody else's apology for it. But certainly, failure to communicate is probably the biggest lesson from these transactions. I cannot overemphasize that. When you're the agent, you've got your transactions. They are the most important transactions to you. They're the most important transactions to me. But you have 5 of them to keep track of, and we have hundreds. So you've got to be really involved, and you've got to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And if you're not going to be that person, if you're just going to be the rainmaker, then what you've got to do is you've got to have somebody on your team that really is attentive to those details and communicates effectively.
Sounds a lot.
More than anything, that's the biggest. And then don't burn bridges. It's a small community, and no matter what, Atlanta's a large place to do business. But even Atlanta, I can get to pretty much anybody in the real estate industry within a call or two. So don't burn bridges. You may need that person someday in the future.
Right. And I'm just thinking about the overly emotionally engaged agent that isn't the calmest person and blows up and starts pointing fingers and creates this big issue. Well, nobody's going to want to work with that person again. And that's just going to be
and just playing off of what you just said, I can't express enough. There are situations where I'm in small groups with realtors and a name comes up and somebody rolls their eyes. The next person says, "Oh gosh, this person was horrible to deal with." And before you know it, everybody's kind of piping up. And people remember these things, and you want people showing your listings. So be nice. It as my law partner says, you always start nice. You can go where you need to go from there, but you always start nice.
Very good. Sounds a lot like marital advice, doesn't it? Learn to apologize. You got to communicate more. There's all kinds of parallels there.
Absolutely.
Having worked with a lot of agents, what are some of those, if I were you, kind of action tips that you could share to agents that are watching? If I were you, I would, whatever.
Right. First, if I were you, what I would start with is something I got out of a recent book I read. Bought it for someone and couldn't get my son to read it. It was called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And that is a book I read and I reread. And there's a little solution to worry that he talks about. And it coincides nicely to Mel Robbins' 5-4-3-2-1. What he talks about is, always ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? When you asked me if I wanted to do this, I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is, I won't be invited back. But, then do everything you can to mitigate the worst thing happening. The second tip is to accept that the worst thing could happen, and then do everything you can to mitigate it. So I think too often people are trying to go for perfect when good is good enough. I'm a perfectionist, but there is a point at which you should have a bias towards action. And one of the other books that I am reading right now, I'm into that one of the agents locally mentioned in our small group, Carrie Folletti, 5-4-3-2-1 by Mel Robbins, was a very important book to her. It basically forces you to take action within the first 5 seconds by counting down and jumping out. So I would focus on the strength of my relationships. I would not take my vendors. If you're the best agents, go really, really deep with their loan officers and their title agents, because those folks can make or break you and your transactions. Plus, they can be a great advocate for you. They can help sell you. The other thing that I would mention is, for some reason, a lot of agents, at least in Georgia, have what I call reluctance. And, we've heard calls, notes, and pop-bys. It's nice to write notes. We all like receiving notes. But if you're not going to pick up the phone and talk to folks, it's going to be hard to really go deeper with the relationship. So take a chance and ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? We recently put out a script to our agents, because with interest rates falling, right now is the time for agents to be calling their clients that they've closed for, both buyers and sellers, in the last 3 years, because rates have dropped over a point in the last year in a lot of cases. So it's time to reconnect the consumer to the loan officer. You get to be the hero. I've beta tested this with my own. My wife gets to test out some of my crazy ideas, and she tried it while we were on vacation. She called about 30 of her clients, and I think 5 or 6 of them refinanced. One told her he was getting ready to sell a property, and she connected them with the loan officers. The loan officers are happy, and so. If that's not a reason to call some past clients, I don't know what is. It's fun to help people save money. So I would recommend that when we hang up, you do something like that right now. But
easy way to be the hero.
Easy way to be the hero.
Here's a way to save money.
My last piece, and I'm going to hit you with one more, is
okay.
Don't become complacent with setting bigger goals. I mean, every year I set a big, hairy, audacious goal, and I rarely hit it. But every year our numbers go up and up and up and up. If you set a goal too low, you will hit it, but you will not become successful.
I appreciate that. I've got a couple of questions that came in. We'll do those, and then I want to ask you about your favorite books. Now, you've mentioned some of them, but I'd love to hear any other ones that you would say, hey, this needs to go on your reading list. Linda Wirtz says, what are a couple of problems that may have come up in a title search that would affect closing? She said, I've been pretty lucky, so good for her, but what tends to be those things?
Well, and I'm sure this is true nationally. I joke that the movie Sixth Sense, I see dead people, and dead people scare me. Nobody can screw up a title more than dead people. And, if somebody dies in Georgia without a will, and if the property, heaven forbid, was owned as tenants in common, which means upon that person's death, their interest doesn't go to the surviving spouse or other party, then that's going to delay closing unless they've dealt with and probated the estate well before they go to sell the property, which leads me to another thing that you out there, agents, when you are dealing with people, it's important to get them to open up to you, because if you are showing, if you're doing a listing presentation to that sweet little old lady, it's probably time to get on the phone, ask your favorite title company to pull the deed, see how they own title, or she owns title, because chances are there's probably there might have been a spouse, and so those kind of problems, bankruptcies, judgments, any type of legal action. These are the kind of things that will absolutely prevent closings from occurring until the problem's resolved. Linda, you're a lucky lady. If you're in Atlanta, come visit me. I'd like to handle all of your closings. It would be nice if we never had those those problems. Unfortunately, people die, they go bankrupt. So those are just a couple of examples. But we teach courses on title exams and issues that pop up, and which makes me get to one point real quickly, Jeff, which is from one of your questions, and I don't even remember which one it was, and we may not get to all the questions that you and I talked about possibly, and that is if you're a real estate agent and you're representing the buyer and you're telling the buyer at my closing table that they don't need title insurance. I have had to take the agent out of the room and basically have a very stern conversation. I may be rubbing some folks wrong that are listening to this, but I can assure you, if in Georgia, the good and marketable title is defined as title that would be insured by a title insurance company with no special exceptions, there's a reason why they write the contracts that way. And in a nutshell, there's never going to be a situation where that buyer comes back and sues you because you advised them to buy title insurance. Flip of that is if you're the person telling them not to buy the title insurance and there's a title issue that is not the result of a failure by the closing agent or the title examiner, and there are a number of examples, and it's beyond the scope of this interview, who do you think they're going to blame? Right. So it's not only because I am a title agent and sell title insurance, but it's because I wouldn't buy a house anywhere in the country without it.
Right. Appreciate that advice. We actually had it was a for sale by owner situation where my wife and I were looking to buy from someone who said that they were a realtor and they advised us not to get title insurance. And that day ended our relationship around that that sale because we weren't going to listen to that.
Yeah, right.
All right, one more here, and then we'll have to kind of sort of wrap things up. Again, I want to hear about the books.
Sure.
Charles says, what do you recommend is the best way to resolve an issue during the final walkthrough that wasn't properly done by the seller? How do you arrive at a dollar figure? I don't know if that.
Wow. You know, Charles, that's a tough question because it really just depends on the facts. A lot of times, believe it or not, those kind of issues do pour over to my closing table, and what I'm trying to do at that point is help the parties reach a resolution, not take sides, but almost be an intermediary or a mediator. I will tell you that depending on that walkthrough and depending on the items discovered, if brought to my attention and my duty is to address these with the lender, you run the risk of possibly delaying closing, which nobody wants. But if they're largely cosmetic or issues that just were promises made by a seller and were not fulfilled, then I would, if I was using any just easy answer, title insurance underwriters will tell our firm if we're going to escrow for, let's say, a lien that we are waiting on a payoff, but we have gotten permission to close based on whether it's a verbal or whatever. They'll ask us to hold back 2 times the amount. So if I were an agent and I was looking for a simple solution, I might say, look, let's have the attorney just hold twice what we think it's going to be, come to some agreement. We'll get you get the work done, or we'll get the work done, and any excess proceeds will be released to the seller as long as they perform.
Thank you.
Charles, it's a tough question because every situation is different, but to the extent I can't give legal advice for states, I'm not a lawyer, but to the extent that it's sort of broad and general, if anybody wants to email me or call me after the show, they're welcome to do so.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking that one. So books, what should be on an agent's reading list? Maybe this would be your all-time favorites or something you've been reading recently.
So A couple of the books that I'm reading, I really like this How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, because I think for a lot of people, worry is the emotion that impacts their effectiveness and their ability to get work done. Um, and to go along with that, sort of a modern day version of that book, because that book is 80 years old, but people worried about the same things 80 years ago they do today. It's just they didn't have the same technology we have. But the 5 second rule by Mel Robbins, I'm enjoying. I'm a voracious reader, but my book list, I would encourage people to read that, Built from Scratch. One of the lessons that I didn't get to share earlier that I will share from that, and that I thought was somewhat liberating, and it made it easier for me to make decisions, was Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus. The second thing that always stuck with me was they said, we make a lot of decisions, and for every 10 decisions we make, 3 of them are bad decisions. 4 of them are mezza. And it's the 3 to 4 winners that become the cash cows that result in success. So their point was, even back then, even before I was synthesizing all these ideas, bias towards action, you've got to make decisions, and procrastinating is a decision. It's just a bad one. For agents, I really like a book called How to Be a Rainmaker. One of the things that I've always been able to do is go out and cultivate and create relationships, but I'm always trying to get better at it. And along with that book is a book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. And I think agents, really, you're doing 2 things. You're negotiating for your clients, and you're marketing to create clients. And if you can do those 2 things really, really well and skillfully, you can't help but be successful.
Well, thank you. That will keep people reading here for a little bit. Any last final closing advice? I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been extremely helpful, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I can't thank you. I'd like to really give a shout out to you and Josh of Fathom, and I'd also the founder, Mike Dole, who was a district manager. If you're listening, thank you for and Marco. Apparently, I made some kind of an impression, and hopefully, I'll be asked back. But ultimately, at least to Fathom in Georgia. But I would just say this has been an honor. I really am always trying to get better, always trying to learn and practice what I preach. So I would invite anybody, if they have questions or comments or even constructive criticism, I'd love to hear from you and see how we did today. And thank you, Jeff. It's been really an honor and a pleasure working with you. You've really made this a very comfortable process. And if anybody gets asked to do this, Jeff is great to work with, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you.
All right, I'll send you the check for that later. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, it's been a pleasure working with you as well, and enjoyed the conversation here that we've had in front of everybody. So thank you for that, and we'll let you go then. Before the rest of you leave, let me remind you, Fathom offers 100% commission and the tools designed for your success. It's built around the agent. It's a company that works for you rather than you working for the company. That starts with an amazing commission structure, but then there's multiple tiers of service. There's a lot of activity among the agent community. We're about trying to help you succeed in your real estate business. You get stock with every transaction. We offer KV Core's CRM technology, truly affordable healthcare, paperless transaction system, and a lot more. And we're continuing to grow, and that's exciting. So visit fathomcareers.com to learn more about a company that works for you rather than the other way around. Next week, our guest is Mike Capobianco. He is out on the other coast. For some reason, we tend to do coast-to-coast guests from week to week, but Mike, he's out in California. He's a realtor and district director in Orange, California. Among other things that he's going to share, he's going to talk about how you can make a 6-figure income by selling manufactured homes as a real estate agent. So who'd have thunk? So I'm looking forward to hearing what Mike has to say. He has a lot of years of experience in the business, but also this sort of niche topic as well of maybe an income source that you didn't know about. So looking forward to having him on. And we'll see you all next Wednesday, same time live at 1:30 p.m.